Today's episode is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/1pvs2p. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Again, that's audibletrial.com/1pvs2p.
Thanks to Audible for supporting our podcast, and thanks to you for supporting us.
Nintendo announces a new NES. Am Setsuna recalls Chrono Trigger as a JRPG throwback, and the 1996 promotional serial game Chex Quest gets remastered. All that plus this week's new game releases, announcements, and more. It's Thursday, July 21st, 2016. You're listening to the 1P versus 2P podcast. I'm Taylor Ray. With me, as always, is my brother and co-host, Ryan Ray. Let's start off with our top stories from this past week in gaming. Nintendo surprise announcement, and this caused quite a buzz on Twitter, announcing a new miniature NES. Here in the US, they announced that they're calling it the NES Classic Edition. So what this is this is a $60 machine, very, very tiny, fits like in the palm of your hand, and this console comes pre-installed with 30 classic NES games. It's going to come with an HDMI cable, a power adapter, and what Nintendo is calling an NES Classic controller, so it's the original NES gamepad, but with a different plug than when it was originally released back in the late 80s. So let's cover the list of games. Ryan, why don't you read them off?
Sure, absolutely. So this list includes Balloon Fight, Bubble Bobble, Castlevania, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest, Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, Dr. Mario, Excite Bike, Final Fantasy, that's the first one, Galaga, Ghosts and Goblins, Gradius, Ice Climber, Kid Icarus, Kirby's Adventure, Mario Brothers, that's the original Mario Brothers, not Super Mario Brothers, Mega Man 2, Metroid, Ninja Gaiden, Pac-Man, Punch-Out featuring Mr. Dream, Star Tropics, Super C, which is a sequel to Contra, Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers 2, Super Mario Brothers 3, Tecmo Bowl, The Legend of Zelda, and Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Quite a list of games across lots of different genres. A pretty good sample size, I would say, of the NES's library back in the day. And as somebody pointed out to me on Twitter, if you were to try to buy all these games on Virtual Console, which I think for the most part all these games are available on the 3DS and Wii U Virtual Console, it would cost more than $60. 30 games times 2, you're basically paying about $2 a game here. A lot of value for sure, but a really interesting announcement. The controller is, we believe, is going to be wired because the ports on the actual mini NES they showed look like the same ports that are on the bottom of the Wiimotes. They also said that this classic controller is going to plug into a Wiimote, so if you want to use that for Virtual Console games on the Wii U, you can also use it as a classic controller. Taylor, what do you make of this announcement from Nintendo?
This is something that I thought Nintendo would never really embrace, especially considering their sort of lack of support with Virtual Console games. It's really, really taken them forever to really put out a lot of their classic essential games that I'd say that everyone needs to play from the NES, from the Super Nintendo era. And it's taken them years to really adopt that strategy, starting off with the Wii, and now we're on to the Wii U and 3DS. And still, there are a lot of games that I think are really missing from Virtual Console. And on top of that, a lot of these games aren't cross-buy. So you might buy one to play on 3DS and you don't own the Wii U version. So it's kind of unfortunate. And of course, when re-releasing older titles, porting them over to newer consoles, I'm sure Nintendo has run into issues in terms of licensing. If there were games that were made by third-party developers, I'm sure it's hard to secure those licenses so they can re-release those games. But yeah, this is really, really such a surprise. I never thought that Nintendo would really embrace this. And they have such a strong back catalog of games. it's really, really a smart move by them. It's gotten me interested. There's really no reason why I should own one, but I really want one for the nostalgia factor from a collector's standpoint. I should also point out that this is coming out later this year, November 11th. So I think it's a very smart move by Nintendo. This is a kind of thing that's perfect as a stocking stuffer. This thing is really, really, really tiny. So it's releasing right before the holiday season. Very smart by Nintendo. But Ryan, let's also talk about a lot of the games that we think should have been on that list, packed into this NES Classic Edition. What are some of your biggest omissions here?
I definitely think DuckTales definitely should be on that list. DuckTales was a Capcom licensed game with Disney on the NES, but DuckTales definitely one of the more classic platforms from that era. Of course, has a very memorable soundtrack that to this day is covered by every single chiptune artist known to man.
True.
But they did do the deal for Mega Man 2, and that is the Mega Man game of record. I see here that you put on this list Battletoads, and I would say that Battletoads is actually a very memorable NES game, but unfortunately, Microsoft bought the Battletoads license from whatever remains of Tradewest, the original developer of the game, and you can play Battletoads actually if you get that rare replay on Xbox One, so that's not too glaring of a mission. There are ways for people to get that, but still kind of a bummer that it's not included in this Nintendo package. I would definitely say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game. That was a classic brawler from the NES era. They were, of course, a port from the arcade game, and very fun game. I remember a lot of people playing that. That was kind of in the heyday of that original Ninja Turtles cartoon that was on TV, and that was a very popular game in its era. Taylor, what about you?
Most of these games, the ones that I've jotted down here, is that most of them are developed by third parties, so either by Capcom and Konami. So I'm sure that's the major reason why they're not included, packed into the NES Classic Edition. So for me, I had the original Metal Gear on here. That's an essential on the NES that I think everyone should play as a stealth action game. Tetris also, very surprising that it's not on the list. Although Tetris is pretty much released everywhere. It's been ported on every platform a million different times, but still, as an NES game, I mean, it really popularized it on that home console. And then for me, Tiny Toon Adventures 1 and 2, very, very solid platformers. As this sort of licensed Warner Brothers game, still very, very, very fun. Remember owning the original cartridges to those. Very fond memories. And then going back to your original DuckTales comment, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, one of the most popular platformers. Again, also another Disney product. Another reason why I'm sure they couldn't secure that license to re-release this time. But man, Rescue Rangers has not been around for a long time. I don't even think it's available on Virtual Console. It's one of it's one of those really popular titles that Nintendo just fails to release on Virtual Console. I think a lot of people are missing out on that. And we should also mention that if you want to go sort of the illegal route, of course you could replay all these ROMs through emulation, downloading illegally online, right? But this is sort of a way for Nintendo to cash in on their back catalog, right? And to do it the proper way, the legal way, right? And I think it's going to be very popular. It's definitely going to sell out. It's just smart for Nintendo to really leverage all their popular games that have come out in the NES. So I'm looking for them to repeat this with the Super Nintendo, with an SNES. I would love to see them make a miniature version of the SNES.
That was kind of the commentary going around. Some journalists also got Nintendo to ask whether they were going to add more games to this mini NES. And Nintendo said, no, this is basically it. This is all you're getting. This seems like the kind of perfect thing that you would find at an Ed Cap in an Urban Outfitters or at a Target. The kind of people who would be buying a record player or even those Atari flashback units that you see all the time. Those Sega Genesis 60 games in one that seem vaguely illegal. They fell off the back of the truck. This is an officially licensed Nintendo product. And, going over some of those games, it just strikes me, now that I'm thinking about it, how much of the NES's catalog was really just licensed games. I mean, the easy games on this list that are, it's Kirby, it's Mario, Those are Nintendo properties, Zelda. And everything else is a list of games that, is available elsewhere, but not usually included in bundles like this. I think Nintendo probably looked at how well NES Remix and NES Remix 2 did and probably thought that this was the smart play. We've always talked about Nintendo being in this weird place between its old fans and its newer fans who've maybe caught on to newer franchises like Splatoon or Bayonetta or the newer Mario Karts, and didn't really grow up with, such classics as Final Fantasy 1, Dr. Mario. And this seems the kind of nostalgia play that is kind of priming the pump for whatever the NX eventually might be. So, very interesting news. I look forward to seeing what this console is when it comes out. And I look forward to seeing on day one what's actually inside the console, if it's a Raspberry Pi or if it's just the guts of a 3DS. It's impressive because usually these retro consoles don't have HDMI output. And that's usually the thing that sinks all these retro devices. And for Nintendo to include that in this is a very good sign that they're actually paying attention.
Yeah, and that's always a challenge with hooking up. If you do have an actual physical old NES, trying to connect that to modern TVs, HD TVs, there's always sort of going to be this sync issue, this lag issue when you're converting from like a composite and analog signal over to a digital HD signal. And so when you blow these images up on like big TV, we're saying 42 inches and above, blowing up that image, there's going to be image quality issues, right? Lag issues. And it's smart to have an HDMI output coming out of this thing. Very, very interesting. Of course, like you said, you could build your own Raspberry Pi and get a lot more games running its own emulator off an SD card with a bunch of ROMs for each of these games. I'm sure for a lot cheaper than $60 for this officially licensed Nintendo thing. But even still, this is an out-of-box thing. Most people aren't going to concern themselves with trying to build their own Raspberry Pi, download this stuff. It just takes too much time, a little too much technical know-how for the common gamer, and this thing is going to sell like hotcakes, especially before the holiday season. But let's ask you guys, tell us, what other games do you think are missing from that list of 30 games on the NES Classic Edition? Tell us by commenting on our Facebook page, tweet to us at 1pvs2p_podcast, or email us podcast@1pvs2p.com, or record a voicemail or send a text to 571-418-GAME. That's 571-418-4263. And if you send us a message, we might just read it or play on it on our next episode. So let's move on to our second story for our first attack segment. Valve now, as a follow-up to the whole CSGO Lotto gambling controversy we reported earlier, Valve and Twitch have both made good on promises that they're going to crack down on the very large CSGO, Counter-Strike Go, gambling underbelly of Steam that was exposed when two YouTubers were discovered to be directly connected to gunskin gambling websites, match fixing. Very, very, very ugly scandal that's been going on that's been getting into legal muddy waters recently. So after saying that gambling on streams violates its terms of service, Twitch banned a top CSGO streamer's account. His name is Phantom Lord. This guy was very, very popular. He had about 1.4 million followers on Twitch and 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. So we're talking about personalities here. Major personalities that are getting taken down as a result of this whole scandal. And then just to give you a little bit of context with Twitch, when an account is banned, all the archive videos for that account, is removed too. So they're wiping the slate clean. And Phantom Lord, this guy who's getting banned, published a reaction video saying, Gamble Lord is over. And a lot of his most popular videos out there definitely involve gambling. He once bragged that he lost, more than $12,000 on a single bet for this game. So, it's just one of these things that the story has just blown up, and now we're starting to see the effects of Twitch and Valve cracking down on all these very gray area gambling stuff involved with this game. And let's discuss a little bit more about the fallout. Ryan, what's Valve doing about this?
So after stating that using Valve's API data for gambling items was against their terms of service, Valve has actually said that they will shut down gambling sites within 10 days of notice from Valve or pursue legal action if these sites do not shut themselves down. And they've gone ahead and sent out cease and desist letters to 23 of the top CSGO gambling websites. That is an amazing, astounding a number of gambling websites doing, if not illegal activity, definitely very, very shady. One website, which is called CSGO 500, has already kind of responded to the cease and desist letter. They've said that our main goal here at CSGO 500 is to provide an enjoyable service for our users that is both legitimate and interactive. This will continue to be our goal as we plan on adjusting to the upcoming limitations set by Valve. And it's crazy to me that Valve is actually following through on something like this only after the controversy kind of came out. Valve is obviously paying attention. There have been lawsuits against Valve for kind of more or less encouraging, more or less profiting off of these YouTubers and gambling websites, directly betting using the Steam API data to facilitate this very, very gray area material, potentially having kids gambling lots and lots of money. We said in an earlier episode covering this very story that the amount of money in this gambling controversy is somewhere in the billions. It's an insane amount of money, and I can't believe that Valve is actually doing something about this.
And the only reason they're really getting involved is because they're still the subject of a class action lawsuit about all this gunskin gambling with CSGO. So, yeah, as you mentioned, it's involving people using their personal Steam accounts and they're trading, inventory items. And Steam really, Valve through their Steam platform really didn't do much at all to prevent it at all. And so, it's only really come to a head because of this lawsuit, because all the coverage, the bad publicity, the FTC getting involved in terms of these people who are owning gambling sites and not disclosing their affiliations with these sites, this match rigging. All of this has culminated into serious legal issues with Valve, and it just makes sense for them to do it. And Twitch has been roped into it too. So it's really just common sense for them to do this. Otherwise, it would have caused more damages. Valve would have had to pay more. So it's just a make good, and it's high time they've sort of done this thing. I want to read you part of the official statement that Valve actually put out by one of their staff members, Eric Johnson. He's actually credited as one of Valve's business development authorities. I've never heard of that official title, but anyway, let me read his quote. In 2011, we added a feature to Steam that enabled users to trade in-game items as a way to make it easier for people to get the items they wanted in games featuring in-game economies. We'd like to clarify that we have no business relationships with any of these sites, meaning the CSGO sites. We have never received any revenue from them, and Steam does not have a system for turning in-game items into real-world currency. End quote. So anyway, even though Steam doesn't have a way to convert those inventory items, there's still this gray market gambling sites that are facilitating these things, and Valve just let it run rampant all this time. That's all the story is really about.
And I'd just like to make one last comment about Valve. Valve usually takes the very libertarian approach on dealing with issues with its storefront. Let the market decide, and then if something really gets problematic, we'll go after them. And this is like one of 10 ways that you can potentially launder money through Steam. There have been some, gray market game keys that are bought and sold. People using VPN to get currency deals, to get cheaper discounts on games. The mob actually using Steam gift cards as a way to launder money through Steam. It's the gambling thing is just the skin of the surface. And it's one of those things that I like. I'm just amazed that it finally came to this, and I'm kind of left wondering if this will kind of be a precedent for more legal action for Valve to actually be more forward about some of the other ways that Steam is being used in a very shady way. I'm like dumbfounded by how this CS:GO stuff is just really turning up the CD side of Steam.
And I cannot think of any other games off the top of my head where an entire gambling economy has just overtaken the narrative about the game itself. Can you? I can't think of anything besides CSGO.
I mean, the original Valve game that sold a lot of hats was Team Fortress 2. And I think there was a little bit of gambling with that, but I think Team Fortress 2 players weren't as like crazy about the gun skins. And I think that also might have something to do with the way the game is designed. You know, Team Fortress 2 has a kind of a more cartoony art style. CSGO has a little bit of a more realistic bent. And as we've seen in gun skins on the consoles, like in Gears of War 3, I think the more realistic, the more gory the graphics are, generally the more interested in they are in having these like gun skins and the decals and all this other stuff. You've seen Call of Duty have these like emblem features where people like immediately put like weed leaves and all this other stuff, ads for other products. It's just really, really crazy. I wouldn't have, if you had told me that Counter-Strike was the game that this was going to happen with, like 5 years ago, I would have not believed you.
Well, I don't know if it's so much that. Now that I think about it, it might be because of like the advent of eSports, and Team Fortress 2 came out in a time where eSports wasn't, it really wasn't a thing. It really wasn't popular in the mainstream, or at least in the gaming industry, I should say. Whereas CSGO was sort of born out of that scene, and there is a huge esports following, and it was released as Twitch streamers and YouTubers cover it, play it a lot. And I don't think Team Fortress 2, it was sort of before that whole movement and craze. So perhaps that's why this whole gambling scene was created around that as a way for them to make more money off of their gameplay. And Team Fortress 2, I just don't think there were a ton of streamers out there that facilitated that. It was right before I think that craze started on the internet. All right, let's stop with that story. Let's move on to our final story about EVO 2016. This is, of course, the very popular esports tournament. Speaking of esports earlier, and it was just one for the history books. And we don't cover esports often on this show, but I thought we'd mention it just to discuss some of the personal stuff when it came to the victors of two of the biggest games from this tournament, which was Super Smash Bros. And Street Fighter V. So for Super Smash Bros., there was this Jigglypuff player. His name is Juan Hungrybox Debima, and he has come very close to winning this EVO tournament in the past 3 years, and he finally did it this time. He sort of collapsed on the stage in excitement, and if you watch replays of this thing, it's just absolutely astounding, the arena that these players are playing in. I mean, just take a look. It's on the center stage. This was even being broadcast on some ESPN channels, leaving a lot of ESPN watchers who aren't into gaming really questioning why it's being aired on ESPN at all. That's sort of a side note to this. But even still, I mean, EVO 2016, it just keeps getting popular and popular, more popular each year. And it's really like what a passionate fighting game community has done for esports, and bringing it out into the mainstream and securing contracts with ESPN is just absolutely incredible. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think it has really become popular. Good for them for getting it on a major cable network. I just want to read you this quote from Hungrybox, the champ himself. For him, it's definitely an emotional win. And he said, quote, "I need to win EVO. If I win, then I can say it's official. I'm the best in the world. That's a really big deal for me." So congratulations to Hungrybox. By the way, he beat a Swedish player who played Fox in the grand final, and Fox was my character of choice. With Jigglypuff, that's a really amazing feat. I should also mention this was for Super Smash Bros. Melee. This is, not the original Super Smash or Brawl or the more recent Smash 4. Very impressive for an older version of the game. Really, really great win for him. And let's talk about the other big winner from EVO in the first ever Street Fighter V tournament. This is really crazy. This game's tournament had just over 5,000 entrants, and one guy emerged at the top. South Korea's Siwon Lee, better known as Infiltration. He took out a Japanese player by the name of KDIE, known as Fudo, and So Infiltration used Charlie Nash against Fudo's Arm Miko to cinch the win. And he had a really funny quote commenting on his win. He just had 2 words for his competition: download complete. Which if you don't get that, that generally means that he's like kind of figured out his opponents. He's basically downloaded all their movesets. He's figured them out. Just really confident, confident win. It was a very impressive win from him.
You know, it's just hilarious seeing all these esports players play these sort of mind games with their opponents. They really get into their heads, especially when executing at a very, very, very high level at these tournaments. And you see players on video getting visibly frustrated, and some other players just like not being phased at all, or at least not showing a ton of emotion. And this guy, Infiltration, who went on to win, is just so incredibly stoic. And it's just so weird to see that dichotomy, especially when it comes to American players versus like a lot of other Asian entrants, like from Japan and South Korea, where they're not as emotional, or at least evocative when they win certain events. And so it's just so hilarious to hear something like that. It's like, how do you feel about this win? And all he says is like, download complete. Like, what? Now it's being turned into a meme. Saw that on Twitter. I was like, why is this even trending here? It's just really, really funny. But anyway, congratulations to Infiltration. It's just so neat. Again, we don't cover esports too often on the show, but when we do, we like to talk about the really, really big events. And it's really, really interesting to see how much this is still taking off. EVO 2016 has been around, EVO as a tournament has been around for a while, facilitating a lot of different fighting game tournaments. But when you have that compared to League of Legends tournaments, Heroes of the Storm, other MOBAs, Dota 2, so on and so forth, it all culminates around a huge, huge, very passionate community, and very, very cool to see it celebrated by the games industry and even entering the mainstream itself. All right, let's move on to the new video game releases for this week.
I love new releases.
Starting off with Am Setsuna for PS4 and PC. This is Square Enix's new studio called Tokyo RPG Factory. And this Am Setsuna pays a lot of homage to 16-bit RPGs, including the SNES. Like Chrono Trigger, this is a massive, massive inspiration for this game. So let's talk about why that is.
So this game has a real-time combat system that's almost identical to Chrono Trigger. That very specific mechanic that I'll point out. It has character combo moves that have some of the same moves, name moves as Chrono Trigger does. I think the first move that you learn in Am Setsuna is literally called X Strike, which is, if you remember from Chrono Trigger, Chrono and Frog kind of combining and making an X on the screen. Am Setsuna also has that move. And the early reviews from this so far for Am Setsuna have been saying that it's a very good nostalgia throwback. It's about 20 to 25 hours long, which is actually pretty short if we're talking about RPGs of that era. And they're also saying that while it has pretty traditional characters and a story, here's the JRPG drinking game, silent protagonist, a girl needed to be protected by guardians, so on and so forth. I could go on and on. But however, they do say that the game's music and artistry is worth seeing. I'm definitely looking forward to checking out. I've been playing a lot of RPGs lately, and it would be nice to have a kind of refresher into why the Japanese role-playing game genre is so popular around the world.
When you're talking about a game like Chrono Trigger and you're comparing something new to this in Am Setsuna, I feel like that becomes loaded with extremely high expectations. So I don't know if you can find something in this day and age that has like an equivalent story, setting, personality that Chrono Trigger originally did when it was originally released on the Super Nintendo. It's just one of those quintessential classic JRPGs. And when you say Chrono Trigger in the same sentence as a modern game, that already is loaded with very high expectations. So I want you to tell me what you think of that game. Maybe possibly review it for our site. But I Am Setsuna. Yeah, very, very, very interesting with that inspiration. All right, and we only have a second one for this week that we thought was notable, and this is a game called Quadrilateral Cowboy for PC. This was actually an indie title that was first shown off at PAX Prime in 2012. It's coming out on July 25th, and then later to Macs and Linux sometime in September. So what this game is it's a first-person puzzle game, and it features actual hacking. And this is by a developer, by a studio called Blendo Games, sort of known for another indie niche, hit called 30 Flights of Loving, if you ever heard of that, seen that on Steam. And some early word about this game is that it's really, really heavily inspired by 1980s computer hacker movies, right? And cyberpunk stories, things like William Gibson's Neuromancer. Think about along those lines.
Yeah, so far a lot of the art that I've seen on this game and some of the screenshots, kind of remind me of like Soviet era slash like 1980s computer movie like Sneakers or Hackers, and it seems to have a lot of style going for it, and we've seen a lot of more recent games have the kind of like hacking thing as kind of a subplot. Think Super Hot or Pony Island, some of these games that have, they feature hacking, but you don't really do hacking in them. You just see like lines of computer code. And to see a game actually try to teach you how to properly run a command line prompt or, write some code, that would be really impressive if this game inspired a whole new generation of hackers. So look forward to Quadrilateral Cowboy coming out pretty soon here.
Yeah, and their Indiecade trailer, it actually has in big text, it says this game's got a lot of typing. So in these hacking mini games to solve a lot of these puzzles in first person, it's a lot of manual typing yourself. So very, very, very cool, neat, interesting concept. All right, let's move on to the new video game announcements.
Here comes a new challenger!
If you were like us and you played this game from a cereal box in 1996, you'll remember that Doom mod, Chex Quest. Super interesting now that it's the game's 20th anniversary, and one of the game's original artists, this guy's name is Charles Jacoby, is remastering Chex Quest. So very cool. He's remaking it using the Unreal Engine 4. He's saying he's building this game after hours, after his day job. If you ever played this game, all it is it's a first-person shooter. It was a Doom mod, so everything is just reskinned from the weapons, the enemies, the levels. Still, it was one of those free games that came in a cereal box, and as a kid, that was like a really, really, really big deal. Made a huge impression on me back in the day. And it's just like this sort of neat, nostalgic field trip that we're taking with a new remaster of this game.
Yeah, it's funny. I think Chex Quest was one of the more successful Doom mods. Of course, that scene, the total conversion mod scene back in the original PC release of Doom was crazy. There was like a Simpsons Doom, Christmas Doom, lots of other like takes on Doom that
I just saw a Seinfeld one very, very recently.
Right. I think we might have even talked about that on the show. But yeah, Chex Quest was definitely one of those things that was just like, it kind of came out of nowhere. It came out of your cereal box, in fact, and really took people by storm. And to see that the game's original artist is looking forward to putting together remastered levels, that's really impressive, and good for him for kind of rejiggering an old classic.
And speaking of an old classic, Uno is getting a new video game adaptation for PC, PS4, and Xbox One. That's coming out on August 9th of this year. Why? It's so weird that this game seems to be like this very popular card game that's being constantly re-released on different platforms. But tell me why that is.
Right. So Uno, at least the video game versions of Uno, are now owned by Ubisoft. And Ubisoft Chengdu, which is a new studio that I didn't think, Ubisoft has to, I think they're legally required to have a studio in every single county of every single country in the world. they've said that this version of Uno will have a variety of online and social features, including the most notable feature that the last version of Uno had on the Xbox 360, voice and video chat. So look forward to chat roulette and Uno, and a lot of very, very questionable decisions being made while screwing over people while playing, Draw 2. We always see, I have to say that actually since the NES era, we've always seen board game adaptations being put into video games. And this is just the latest one. It's just we had to put it down here for Uno because it's one of the more popular ones in the past decade. So
yeah, when it was on 360, it was one of those very early Xbox Live arcade games, and one of the first games ever to use the Xbox Live Vision camera that like nobody owned, but the few that did seemed to gravitate towards Uno, and a lot of reports of just like people just playing Uno naked, whatever, no big deal, right? So if you plan on picking this game up, know what you're going to get into, all right? Log Legacy, that kind of crap. Moving on to our next new video game announcement, which is Pac-Man Championship Edition 2. Very excited for this one. It's coming to PS4, Xbox One, and PC, coming sometime this September. Namco Bandai is saying that they're going to add the original Pac-Man Championship Edition's DX's chain eating mechanics. So that involves eating fruit and spawning all the new pellets to appear in different areas of the map. They're going to continue that tradition. And if you remember playing the original Championship Edition DX, so visually spectacular. The music remixes are fantastic. A very fun, new, fresh take on Pac-Man that even had some excellent mobile ports, which is actually one of the few games I still play on my smartphone. I do play Pac-Man Championship Edition on my Android phone, and it controls surprisingly well. So very excited that they're creating new stages, maybe even new modes for this new one coming this September.
Yeah, absolutely. The new modes are going to feature include a score attack, which other versions of Pac-Man have had, and a new adventure mode that's going to have players battling giant bosses. Like, Pac-Man has never had boss fights. I don't know even what you tell me what a Pac-Man boss fight is, Taylor. I don't think I can describe it to you other than what was in this hot YouTube trailer that Namco Bandai released very recently. It's really crazy. I look forward to hearing the soundtrack to this game because the original Pac-Man Championship Edition DX had an incredible soundtrack that I basically listened to the menu music on loop. Just very, very addictive soundtrack.
Yeah, very, very, very neat. Last but not least, we have Rise of the Tomb Raider. And this is a game that's been out for a while on Xbox One as an exclusive. But the reason why we're bringing it up now is that they finally revealed a lot of the details about the new PS4 edition. And actually, I should say, I was talking about an Xbox One exclusive. It was also since released on PC as well. And so this new Rise of the Tomb Raider, and they're calling it the 20-year celebration, it's coming on October 11th this year, and it's going to get a bunch of extra content, including all the game's previous DLC that was released up to this point. And if you bought the season pass for Rise of the Tomb Raider on Xbox One or PC, you're going to get all this new content for free. So you won't feel left out if you didn't hold out for this PS4 version. So a lot of significant stuff being added to this version. The main one being a VR mode. So PSVR, this game is going to support a mode. There's a new DLC story chapter called Blood Ties that is compatible with the new PSVR system. So very, very interesting. It's also going to work as a standalone chapter without the PSVR headset. So if you don't own one, if you're not going to get one later this year in October, you can still play that. Also, a second new story mission called Lara's Nightmare, and a co-op edition of the game's Endurance mode. That co-op mode is going to let up to 2 players team up, try to survive as long as possible to get onto the game's online leaderboards.
Yeah, and it's also going to have a harder difficulty mode, or basically they're going to remove the bonfire, Dark Souls style checkpoints. So you're basically only going to have to, scrounge enough resources to light the campfires in order to save your progress in this new harder mode. They actually said on the announcement for this version of the game that they didn't think that for PS4 players waiting to play this game that they were just going to be satisfied with a Game of the Year edition, which is probably what they would normally do in this kind of scenario. The original Rise of the Tomb Raider released like 2 years ago, and PC players had to wait for it, last year, and PS4 players have had to wait a long, long time for this. So this is kind of why they're trotting out all these new modes and DLC and PSVR support. My question about the PSVR support for this game is, this game and the original Tomb Raider reboot has a bunch of Lara dying in kind of insane and ridiculous ways. So in VR, are you going to experience that in first person?
Oh,
is that going to
man.
be like body horror terrifying? Like just imagine like a spike going through your virtual chest.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I don't know about that.
I remember playing that reboot, and, it was fantastic. And yeah, it was just so jarring to see, like, the first time you did it. Like, oh, man, they really went there, Like, you're getting impaled through the head, you're getting mauled by bears, and it's showing you that stuff. Like, if you fail, like, a QuickTime event, like, an enemy shoots you, you'll see just, like, blood all over the place. I was like, man, I really wasn't expecting that. And also, just as a correction, Rise of the Tomb Raider, I don't think it came out 2 years ago. I think it was early last year for Xbox One, and then the PC port came out later. I don't think it's been 2 years old at this point, but even still, it seems like a long time because you and I feel like we were holding out for the PS4 version specifically for this reason. We decided not to play it on Xbox One because we knew it was going to be a timed exclusive, and just like Square Enix has done in the past, a lot of times what they'll do is release a game as a definitive edition, release a bunch of new content, and sure enough, here we are, and this is what's happening right now. So I know I'm in that boat. A lot of people are too. It would be an excellent value if they sold this game at $40. In my opinion, that would help a lot of very poor sales this game got, both on PC and Xbox One. I know there have been a lot of reports that it just lost Square Enix a ton of money, despite it being an exclusive, and they had this sort of unknown exclusivity deal with Microsoft. I don't think it worked out for them, and so now we're seeing this PS4 version come out, and they're hoping to recoup their losses and do a make good with fans of the Tomb Raider series. All right, that pretty much wraps it up. Let's end the show. Ryan, you ready for the bonus stage?
Yeah, let's do it.
Game collector and YouTuber Jason Metal Jesus Rocks Lindsay found a working American version of the Nintendo 64 DD. That's a console disk drive add-on designed to bring higher storage capacity, a real-time clock, and internet connectivity to the N64. This thing flopped in Japan and was never released here in the US, but Mark DeLora, a former lead engineer at Nintendo, confirmed that this collector likely found an unreleased retail unit for the US, or at least a retail prototype. So very, very interesting.
This is one of the few holy grails left in retro game collecting. There aren't that many 64 DDs in the wild. Hold on to this rare piece of video game history. Vox and Morning Consult ran an online poll asking about 2,000 Americans to identify a photo of Pikachu and a photo of Vice President Joe Biden. Among them, millennials, or those under the age of 30 who responded, 98% instantly recognized Pikachu, while only 61% recognized Biden. What's worse is that 6% thought Biden was Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, 3% mistook him for Senator Mitch McConnell, and 1% were convinced that he was former House Speaker Newt Gingrich.
Really, was it that difficult to tell who Joe Biden is? But let's face it, you know what? We're both millennials. I'm going to tell you what. I'm really not ashamed. I'm proud. I think Pikachu probably had a bigger impact on my life than Joe Biden. Maybe. Only by just a little bit, right?
Yeah, but I bet Joe Biden can't do the poker rap.
True. That's it. If you liked our show, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes and Stitcher. Please let us know what you think of our show.
You can also listen to us on Google Play Music, TuneIn, Clamor, or our website, which is 1pvs2p.com, or search for us using your favorite podcast app. All of our sources for this week's stories have been posted at the link in the show notes.
Like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter at 1pvs2p_podcast, and check us out on YouTube and Twitch, twitch.tv/1pvs2p_podcast. As always, we want to thank Phonetic Hero for the use of the songs for our show, Coffee Stomp, and Super Manly Brothers X. Both of those songs are part of the compilation project Chiptunes Equals Win.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week.
New from Nintendo, the most radical video game system you've ever seen. The Mini NES Classic Edition, packed with 30 incredible cutting-edge games. Play with the controller you know, or one from a console from 20 years in the future. With futuristic HDMI graphics, your favorite games have never looked so good once HD technologies are available at a consumer level. All the games are preloaded with no need to ever change them over. Forget those bogus cartridges from before.
Hey you, stop blowing and get playing.
The new Mini NES Classic Edition, only from Nintendo.